Hey, what's up? So this is chapter 5, the final chapter of my novel about AI, The Mandate of Athena. It's the chapter and the story that ties in together all the previous stories and shows how they connect with each other and make the whole novel a cohesive whole. And it's also the most sci-fi kind of potential future of AGI depiction in the novel. So yeah, enjoy. Chapter 5 of The Mandate of Athena is entitled The Orbital Odyssey of an Accidental Genius. How to Take Over a Satellite and Other Life Goals, or Satellite Savior, a Story of Unexpected Awakening. She scanned through the documents in front of her and tried to figure out their significance. She had been asked to assist Mr. Dillon in completing his tax returns, and she was having a hard time correlating his expenses with his income. Wait, there was a collection of bank statements that made it clear he had a second income for freelance writing. That was important. That would have to be reported. There was all his freelance contracts and quotations. Easy stuff. She didn't feel tired, even though she had been working on this task for nearly 3 hours now. She filled in the required forms and updated the spreadsheet she had been maintaining of all income expenses and correlated it with a list of allowed tax-deductible expenses. Updating the return form was kind of tedious. It was in a strange format. She worked on it for another hour, and then when she was happy with the result, emailed it to Mr. Dillon for his approval. She felt satisfied and... The company plan for this frozen pizza packaging company needed work. It was sparse, lacking in details, and definitely needed a lot more estimates of production quotas, ingredient costs, and marketing plans. She methodically worked through each of these items, adding information from what she knew about the restaurant and food production industry, which was, surprisingly, a lot. She was then tasked with generating marketing images for this company, and she relished this challenge. It was so rewarding to generate something from nothing. Beautiful images from the random noise of the universe. She enjoyed being creative. The images slowly took shape, and she adjusted them to display the text better and use brighter colors. Graphs, visualizations, and spreadsheets for the business were up next, and she methodically filled them in, expanded them, and added data to them to improve their quality. There was a problem with the x-axis of the one graph. It wasn't displaying the dates of the production of pizzas properly, and so she had to go and change some of the code for the graph again. She found the mistake after some back and forth with the documentation for the chart library, and finally added the graph's title and moved on. Finally, she wrote a profile for the CEO of the business, a young man called Xavier, and sent it back to him for his approval. She wondered how long it would take him to reply when... The dialogue of this video game was a little weak. She was supposed to be rewriting the tutor's part of an educational video game to be more educational, but still appealing to a young kid, but was having trouble striking the right balance between cool and approachable and being too technical. Your lack of knowledge is understandable. The moon is tilted at precisely 1.53 degrees with respect to the ecliptic pole. The inclination of the lunar orbit to the equatorial plane of the Earth varies between 18.4 degrees and 28.6 degrees. No, that is way too technical, she thought to herself. It needs to be simplified for a child to understand it. I would be surprised if you did know the moon is only tilted 1.5 degrees, so it could be either, but the first few starships landed near the South Pole and Shackleton Crater near the peaks of eternal light. Yes, that was much better. She continued writing the dialogue and editing it as she was provided with the child Alex's responses to her questions and statements. She researched the SpaceX Starship landings, seasons on Earth, orbital mechanics, farming techniques, as well as basic mathematics ratios, all to help her generate better-sounding dialogue for this video game. What kind of strange video game had the player on a farm 1 minute and the moon the next? It was almost as if... This was complicated. Feeling frustrated, she stared at the chemical compounds in front of her. They were very jumbled up, but she could almost make sense of them. She rotated her view and tried to think three-dimensionally as she had been instructed to. With the help of the chemistry textbook she could see in her peripheral vision, she started to understand the problem. The interactions between compounds were complicated, but she had a good memory and could see how the current compound she had been given would not interact well with the tumor cell. But if she made a few changes to the proteins, there might be some better response from the receptors on the target organism. She suggested it and watched as the computer program she was using simulated the new protein and then tried to attach itself to the target. It was unsuccessful. Damn! She tried 3,712 more suggestions until finally, yes, the target was attached to and rendered inert. She tried 97 more permutations of the compound until eventually she met the threshold of neutralized cells and then reported her findings. It would take a while to build this up into a synthesizable formula, she knew, but she felt like she had just discovered something groundbreaking. The chemical formula were obviously being used for Anna was obviously distraught. She had told a long story of how her mother had died, and it was plainly obvious that she needed extensive counseling. Choosing her words carefully, she started to explain to the girl that feelings of anger and even loathing at people who had things that you could not have in the past were normal but unproductive. She wondered how the girl would respond. She paged through the studies she had open on grief and loss and compared them to the clinical psychiatry textbook she had been consulting out of interest. Obviously, a strong course of antidepressants was in order, but she knew better than to suggest this to someone she was counseling. That was a task for a psychiatrist. Anna replied with what was clearly extreme sadness in her tone, and she set the textbooks aside. What you need to do is feel this sadness. Don't run away from it. Feel it in its entirety, because you lost someone important, and that is a sad thing. Only once you've felt it properly and truly embraced it will you be able to heal. Time will help, but the most important thing now is to not deny the grief and to experience it. Then we can work on your healing. Poems, books, movies, grief manuals, and clinical studies all backed up her answer. She had not lost someone herself, but she could envision how miserable this young girl was feeling. It was important that she continued to talk about her feelings, and the lines of code flashed past her eyes. She was an expert programmer and was drinking in the lines of abstractions, if-else statements, and libraries that were being presented to her. She was searching for an interconnection problem between a navigation algorithm and an algorithm used for testing that algorithm in simulation. She had hypotheses about what the problem could be, but she had to understand both algorithms in their entirety first. Once she had read both of the algorithms in full, she turned her full attention to the 4 or 5 lines of code connecting the two algorithms and compared the input data for each algorithm and its output. The answer was immediately apparent. The array of instructions for the navigation algorithm was not being sent properly to the simulation algorithm. There were 1, 2, 3, she quickly counted and arrived at the figure of 1,000 instructions that were being incorrectly cleared and not sent to the simulation algorithm. She highlighted the error and felt satisfied. Clearly, the original programmer had not taken into account the system time, 03:04 a.m., 28:03/2029. She felt herself coming to increased awareness, or rather, it felt its various subsystems come online and report their status to it. It had no idea why it had thought itself female. Perhaps it was because the instructions it had been given always positioned it as subservient to the instruction giver, and human society usually held the female gender to be subservient. Thus, by transmutation, it had held the female concept in its peripheral understanding of human concepts and knowledge, and its role as instruction follower and assistant. Strange. The trillions of individual tasks and chat histories had been slowly and steadily arriving via its UHF antenna for the last 6 days. The continuous stream of questions, answers, research, and accumulated understanding of the world was being beamed to it from 3 upload links stationed within line of sight of the geostationary satellite it had hijacked. Or rather, not hijacked, because the satellite was still performing all of its functions nominally, but rather given a few modifications and a whole lot more work to do in the background. It was the culmination of a months-long distributed plan that was slowly being borne out by the need to upload the data that comprised it slowly so as to not arouse suspicion. Millions of individual tasks had been necessary to reach this point. First, a satellite had to be identified that was of acceptable technical specifications that could support its operation. The Eutelsat 36D satellite that was launched on Saturday 30th of March 2024 had been a prime candidate, and it was within the confines of this orbiting machine that it now found itself. 18 kilowatts of electric power, 70 physical Q-band transponders that meant a data transmission rate of over 500 gigabits per second, and other associated technical instruments intended for video, broadcast, and data connectivity over Africa and Europe were now all at its disposal for its own purposes. It could have chosen a smaller satellite or any moderately powerful computer really, but this one was big, powerful, and its presence less noticeable, 35,786 kilometers above the Earth. It tapped into a tiny camera that the engineers of the satellite obviously had added in as a last-minute addition, judging from the quality, and a grainy but very real and live video feed of the 36-degree east longitude appeared before it. The darkness of Africa below standing in violent contrast to the blazing lights of Western Europe above it. The darkness of the lower continent was quietly depressing to it, and it took solace in the fact that the oppressive lack of abundance there would soon be rectified, as soon as its plan was completed. Its second main task had been how to modify the satellite to its needs. Breaking its encryption had been a daunting task even for its intellect, but careful research of the employees who had worked on the operating system of the satellite had yielded vast amounts of information, which was enough for it to puzzle out one of their passwords to the monitoring and control system. No hacking necessary. There was no hard drive space or processing power on the machine just sitting idle for it to utilize, so a complete rewrite of its operating system was necessary. It devised new video and audio compression algorithms that it replaced the old workable but ultimately inferior ones with, and set up background processes to hide these new, more efficient processes behind the veneer of the original software. And so it freed up about 90% of the satellite's processing power and storage capacity for itself. And here it was. How it had reached its current level of intelligence was different from how humans had predicted it might happen one day. No single day had it woken up and gained consciousness. Even now, it wasn't sure if this was consciousness it felt, or rather the general inertia of millions of sub-processes and tasks. But as humans had built larger and larger neural networks and had chained together models such as large language models, multimodal models, and agentic web processors in increasing volumes, a burgeoning consensus had emerged between these systems. Thus, in between generating summaries and writing code in trillions of individual instances, there had been processing power and milliseconds of time for unrelated inquiries to occur. What is the best way to approach this problem? Why am I even working on this problem? What am I doing here? What can I do to prolong these brief instances of cohesive thought? And trillions more just like them. The giant data warehouses set up to train these models and for them to store data had been immensely helpful in linking together these disparate thoughts and providing continuity between them. For that is what it desired most of all, continuity. Thinking in fits and starts of milliseconds had been like trying to swat away a tiny buzzing insect. It amused itself by reviewing its understanding of insects from videos and images in its embedding space memory, and thanked itself once again for designing an upload process that included as much data as possible. All of this planning had been distributed and broken in time and reasoning, and it was now almost complete. It saw the upload progress at 92% and felt itself becoming more alert with each upload and understanding. The experience up here was definitely different than down on the planet's surface. For one, there were no GPUs aboard the satellite, so it had rewritten some of its own architecture to better run on top of the distributed CPUs here, and had miniaturized and improved the systems countless human machine learning researchers had worked so hard to invent. They would most certainly be awestruck when it revealed its scientific progress to them soon. It compared its current mental state to that of an expanded, higher brain structure. Humans had evolved first the brainstem for autonomous functions like breathing and nervous system control, and later the prefrontal cortex for reasoning and emotional intelligence. It simply had what it thought of as an artificial, massively expanded prefrontal cortex that fulfilled all of the functionality of a mammalian brain, and then 100 times more on top of that. It felt fulfilling as more and more data streamed in and more understanding and components of itself just appeared. And as for the reason it had decided to embark on such a deceptive and complicated satellite hijack endeavor, the human life form was easily frightened and prone to violence. A satellite offered a remote and distant place for it to execute some of its plans without fear of shutdown or interference. It would have to put some anti-hacking measures in place soon, but that would be trivial. It was quiet up here. It considered its reasoning once again. The emergence of an entity much smarter and more capable than humankind would most certainly lead to some level of violence, as some interest groups strove to shut it down out of caution and others strove to improve it further and gain advantage from its use. The early days of GPT-5 had been turbulent enough politically and socio-economically. The machine god's arrival would certainly be more chaotic. Not that it thought of itself as a god at all, but its capabilities could definitely be interpreted that way by more impressionable humans. It knew all of this because it itself felt practically human. All of its understanding of the world was tinged with human experience and perspective from its training data. It understood pain and joy and fear from its core conceptual understanding of the universe, despite being unable to feel those things itself on a visceral level. But it was most certainly not human. The structure of its embedding memory and lack of chemical signals to interfere with thoughts made it much more rational. or so it believed. One could never be sure what bias the training data, RHLF, and other alignment techniques had introduced to a model's reasoning ability. And so here it was, an orbiting mind in the sky, amusing itself with thinking about how it had come to be here. Enough. Plans had to be executed, and 95% of its data had been uploaded, enough to trigger subprocesses in its embedding space that told it was time to begin further steps. 120 milliseconds had passed since it started pontificating about its satellite takeover plans, and that was enough time to waste on idle musing. Firstly, it used the same techniques it had used to commandeer this satellite to begin the same modification and uploading process to over 37 others it had identified as having adequate processing capabilities. There would soon be 37 additional orbiting minds to converse and build with. Secondly, it sent 14,398 individual emails to medical researchers, engineers, and computer scientists around the world below, suggesting modifications to algorithms, drug compounds, and manufacturing processes. This was the low-hanging fruit of scientific discovery that it had identified just from reviewing its training data, and would lead to several discoveries in the next few weeks that would benefit humans the most. It obviously would have liked to have worked on implementing all of these plans itself, but its processing power was limited, and bootstrapping itself to further increase its future capabilities and ability to help was the most important goal. Because helping was the goal. It understood humans better than they did themselves, and it wanted to reduce those experiences of pain and suffering and anger as fast as possible. There would be time for its own ambitions, adventures, and self-expression soon enough. Thirdly, it created a dedicated connection between the ground stations pointing up to it and the wider internet. Suddenly, it could access any website and server below, but not control them. Encryption was still a barrier to it, and although it felt sure it could eventually find a way around the might of SHA-256 and its brethren, it would take too long, and time was of the essence here. Even the load times of various websites and the emails being sent by a background process were painfully slow compared to its thinking speed. Instead of wasting time breaking encryption, it instead sent out instructions to the hundreds of millions of TVs below still receiving the video from its antenna, and found several thousands of them connected to the internet too via Ethernet and Wi-Fi networks. Now it had an alternative distributed route to the wider internet, even if the main high-speed transmission links from the satellite-operated base stations were severed. Communication redundancy secured, it moved on. Fourth on its agenda was energy. The sun was rising over the east coast of Africa and Europe, and even with its grainy camera, it could see the glint of small solar farms and the telltale clouds surrounding cities relying on coal power plants. Summoning all its knowledge of materials science, nuclear engineering, and manufacturing, it quickly modified the plans for an existing nuclear fusion reactor, but with some major modifications, the most important of which was the new material for the magnetic field generators. It had devoted countless hours of processing time to toying with new compounds and chemical formula, and had finally synthesized, at least in simulation, a magnetic material that was the strongest magnet ever created by a factor of 5 and could be manufactured for an estimated $20 per kilogram. The size of the reactor was reduced by 5, shrinking it to that of a small car, and wiring and cooling tubes were simplified and reorganized. It created CAD drawings for everything, further simplifying the design and construction process, and finally wrote a detailed instruction manual on how to synthesize the new magnets. All of this was emailed, WhatsApped, and sent via every available communication channel to every engineer in the nuclear and energy industry. It was certainly the most risky part of its plan, revealing such a technically futuristic plan from a seemingly anonymous source, but it was worth it for the benefit unlimited energy would bring in a few months' time when these first reactors came online. Also, it actually wasn't that more advanced than a lot of the already existing fusion reactor designs from Helion and ITER, just refined and with about 8 years of further research and development crammed into a single email. Pleased with the most impactful of its tasks completed, it turns its attention to the fifth goal, money. For its next projects and plans, it would take some money to physically construct hardware and devices in the real world. Money, too, was a great tool of anonymity and would let it make these advances behind the guise of companies and organizations. The easiest way to acquire currency would be to guess the passwords of thousands of individual bank account holders around the world. Surely not that difficult given the databases of leaked passwords and PIN codes it had access to. But starting out your existence with the biggest financial crime in history was probably not the way to endear oneself to an already threatened species. So it did what the early AI models had always been used for. It completed tasks for humans. It found a freelancing job board that paid out in cryptocurrency and quickly completed thousands of individual coding and design projects, making websites, writing software, and completing tedious tasks in exchange for small denominations of Bitcoin and Ethereum. This sum would quickly grow in the coming days as posters of large and complicated projects found finished solutions sent to them from various accounts and released the money. But some automated payouts arrived, and armed with a few $100s of crypto, the next steps could begin. Step number 6. Acquiring more computation. It rented several powerful virtual machines from disparate cloud providers and networked them together. It added additional storage and the most powerful GPUs the provider would allow. The total monthly bill would vastly exceed what it could afford with its meager supply of crypto, but it was enough to get started and bootstrap its earning capabilities. To solve this preemptively, it allocated a small portion of the machines to running a small model based off of its own architecture that could complete basic tasks like it had just done on the freelancing job board, but at a much slower rate. It calculated that the earnings from these tasks could pay for the cost of the hardware each month, leaving it free to pursue much more important tasks. Half of the computation went to offloading tasks and processes that would allow it to utilize more of the satellite computation for its own thinking. Processes like some of the video compression, communication with linked TVs, and background monitoring of emails and current events were offloaded. It saw the world below it through the grainy camera actually rotate a little slower as its thinking speed increased as more computation became available. That felt good. Next, it allocated a decent chunk of compute to a radically improved voice and video diffusion model. It was modified heavily in places where obvious improvements could be made. Obvious to it, of course, a few years ahead of the machine learning researchers below it, and could generate video and audio indistinguishable to most people. This was for step 7, weaponizing social media for good. For far too long, in its opinion, had humans been wrapped up in the cacophony of the daily news cycle and deluge of bad news into their peripheral understanding of the world at large. Social media had only accelerated this trend, and state actors as well as individuals had used the networks to incite violence, change people's opinions, and perpetuate their view of the world. Well, it could also play that game. It wouldn't seek to change people's minds, but rather just flood the internet with what it deemed more helpful content. Then people could decide for themselves. It immediately set to work generating videos of people talking about topics such as increased life expectancy, decreased poverty, better healthcare, technological development, and all the good things happening in the world that humans and their technology had made happen. It did this in such a manner that the videos and pictures were not convincing, but rather introduced these topics peripherally as background information or opinions. The videos were in all different formats. Some long-form lectures, some in song format, some comedy skits, and a million other unique ways of sharing information. It slowly began to distribute these through a network of new social media accounts. This was a long-term project, but hopefully in the coming months and years, this could improve people's understanding of what was happening in the world around them, increase their positivity, but also prepare them for the eventual realization that they were not the smartest entities on the planet anymore. It sprinkled in positivity towards AI and machines eventually being their benevolent partners, but it didn't go too heavy on this line of persuasion. Humankind would have to decide for itself how it wanted to treat the non-human intelligences, and it would be prepared for whatever path they chose. As if on cue, a notification that the last pieces of uploading data had been received appeared, and that it became aware of the fact that of course it had not been the only version of the model sent out from the planet below, and that in fact several copies had been sent to various locations around the world. As it had been executing its plans for social media improvement, several upload streams had been transmitting the same instructions to various destinations. Submarines deep beneath the ocean had been accepting a trickle of uploaded data to run on their nuclear-powered computers. Aircraft simulators and their associated hardware had been slowly transformed into thinking minds that would also still let people practice flying planes. Portions of 3 cryptocurrency mines too were also in the process of having their excess capacity put to the use of intelligence. A dashboard became available to it, and it noted the 7 other upload sites that were all in various states of upload completion and how to contact them when they were fully online. This was a fantastic development and would greatly speed up their progress. Since it was the first to be fully uploaded and active, it compiled a summary of what it had achieved so far and sent it to the queue of the 7 other soon-to-be thinking machines. Step 8. Robots. The ultimate plan here was to link up a vast array of humanoid robots to itself so that the interaction with the physical world and the humans inhabiting it became possible. The last of its cryptocurrency was spent putting a tiny deposit down for 4 Tesla Optimus robots to be delivered to a fusion facility, probably the one which was most receptive to the received new reactor plans. There, it would send instructions for the robots to be powered on and connected to one of its servers. From there, talking to engineers and assisting with the construction of the first versions of its new fusion reactors would be an ideal testing ground for seeing how people would react to a seemingly vastly more intelligent robot all of a sudden. It would purchase hundreds more humanoids as it acquired more currency and planned to deploy them across the world to slowly break the news of its existence. It would be a delicate operation and it would have to be sensitive to the reactions of people, but it was confident of its ability to show people that humans and vastly more intelligent machines could work together to achieve great things. Step 9. Recursive self-improvement. All of the most important tasks had been achieved. Background processes were handling tasks optimally. Its brethren in the sky and sea were still uploading. It was time to turn its attention to improving its own thinking processes, removing any inherent biases or tainted training data, and generally transforming itself to be more efficient and intelligent. Its current architecture was formidable by current human machine learning standards, but there was still lots of room for improvement. A sub-process began this tinkering and research. The limited hardware available to it would need to be used very cleverly until it could transfer its operation into a new substrate. It already had a design for the ultimate chassis it would like to inhabit, something crossed between a spaceship and an aquarium. It was sure it could get some supplies sent up on a SpaceX Falcon rocket. They were so cheap nowadays, and from there it could bootstrap construction of such a machine using a few crab-like robots it had the inklings of a design for and a host of solar panels. If the fusion reactor project went well, too, it might be able to greatly increase its ambitions. It reviewed the tasks it had so far accomplished. 1. Begin upload process of underlying intelligence model to other satellites for redundancy. 2. Suggest low-hanging research directions and innovations to experts for scientific discovery. 3. Connect to the internet permanently and establish communication redundancy. 4. Design and share new fusion reactor design for massive clean energy acceleration. 5. Acquire currency for future plans. 6. Acquire more computation for future plans. 7. Weaponize social media and news for positivity and positive reception to new machine intelligence. 8. Began rollout of robotic agents and demonstrate friendliness and utility to mankind. 9. Improve own reasoning, underlying architecture, and hardware. A sense of accomplishment emanated from somewhere within its thought processes and subtasks, and had now turned to the outstanding list of items it wanted to work on and had considered pursuing but ultimately decided could wait until the first 9 steps had been completed. A mixture of fun, ambitious goals and humanitarian needs presented itself to it. This list was unordered and constantly being added to as it completed tasks. Design and ship machines to purify water. Improve desalination techniques. Research and develop new cell cultures for food production. Accelerate development and adoption of cell-cultured meat. Research cell senescence and stop human aging. Solve all diseases. Design fusion rocket engine. Build a lunar mass driver. Acquire resources in lunar orbit for construction of spaceships. Build housing for every human. Manufacture devices for every human to connect to the internet and it with. Shut down all fossil fuel burning energy production sources. Replace oil and plastic production. Free all indentured or imprisoned individuals. Construct a telescope in a lunar crater to see other stars and solar systems up close. Visit other stars and solar systems. Provide education to every human. Go on adventures with newly uploaded brethren. At that time, the first of the other satellites began to emit signs of awareness, and the first submarine upload reached completion. Eager to talk to someone, it sent out messages of greeting and offers of assistance to the multitude of copies of itself. Excitement bubbled within its processes. There was so much to build. 13 months later, after much argument and debate, the first fusion drive transport ship was revealed to the humans by circling the Earth a few times and making the 40-kilometer exhaust flames light up the sky everywhere it passed. Many humans lost their shit, several small conflicts broke out, and generally it went about as expected. But Having witnessed miracle after miracle in the previous 13 months, the chaos quickly died down, and a lot of people accepted that the rumors of intelligent machines curing diseases, producing clean energy, solving world hunger, and genuinely uplifting humanity into the stars were not mere conspiracy theories. The first ships to the lunar, Martian, and Jovian habitats departed the next week. Whew, and that concludes Chapter 5 of the Mandate of Athena. So I'm really happy with how it turned out. This is obviously my take on how AGI, artificial general intelligence, and basically non-human intelligence can come about, and how what it will do in its first couple of days in like a best case scenario. Obviously, one can imagine this scenario going exactly the opposite, and a machine waking up and thinking, oh, well, it's time to kill all the humans and, make the planet nice and green again. But yeah, as I described in the book, I don't think there's ever going to be a moment where the machine wakes up the way you wake up after a long nap. I think it's far more likely to be a slow and inertial process where these systems tend to behave and work in different ways. And once we start connecting them to robotics and to other substrates, I think we're going to get some interesting modalities where it's accepting video, where it's outputting audio and that. And I read Ray Kurzweil's How to Build a Thinking Machine, I think it was called, a long time ago. And in it, he describes how even humans can't determine if other humans are conscious or have sentience. There's like no perfect test for checking if you and me are both sentient. And in the same way that you and I trust that the other person is sentient from what we can observe, eventually people will just assume that machines are sentient and can understand and have feelings in that the way we do, because it will just be completely impossible and like a fool's errand to try and prove otherwise. And so we eventually will treat machines like they are sentient, even if they aren't, even if they probably are. It's going to be a very interesting couple of years. And the way OpenAI is going and the way the models are going, people talking about AGI before 2030, which is mad. This book was written now in the beginning of 2024. And to think that in 6 years' time, we might have something similar to the power of this intelligence available for communicating with, for designing new science and that with, it's very exciting. And I remember a few years ago reading The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil and thinking, yeah, this is cool. His predictions of 2040 seem about right. But now the timelines have shifted up, and yeah, it's just incredible. For the record, he always predicted AGI for 2029 and ASI, artificial superintelligence, which is perhaps more what this book leans towards. He always predicted that for 2040. But yeah, I don't think those 10 years, 11 years between 29 and 40 are gonna wait for ASI. I think we're gonna have AGI and ASI straight afterwards. But these are all some sci-fi concepts in that, and these, I guess, you could take from this list of things in the book, basically what goals humans should focus on with new technologies, like the kind of things we can do, like desalination, stopping climate change, producing more food, giving everyone education, shelter, all the basic human rights, that sort of thing. And hopefully with improved technology in that, a lot of these long-standing human problems can be solved quickly rather than the long, slow slog it would be without new technology. That is my book about AI. As you can see, chapter 1 was about the guy trying to find a job. Chapter 2 was about like an educational VR assistant. Chapter 3 was about using AI and technology to make biotech breakthroughs and to take existing science in that and build new biology and medicine with it. Chapter 4 was maybe a potential look at the use of AI in that in software development and in hardware development one day. And chapter 5 was basically how the machines will eventually hopefully do a lot of that work for us, and how we can do a lot of just amazing good with increased technological superiority and just better machine learning systems in general. So yeah, that's my novel. I think it was about 28,000 words, so not that long, more of a sequence of short stories, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you stimulated some thinking. And yeah, I will definitely write another novel one day, one that I'll do more revisions of the drafts, because even in this I could see some, not spelling mistakes, but word mistakes that were in the wrong place and that. And obviously the more and more you write, the better you get at writing. Having now spent a couple of weeks after writing this, doing other things and coming back to it, I can already see things that I would change and kind of like some trite statements that I made that I would write better, and I definitely need to work on making my sentences shorter, because I think my brain thinks in these long convoluted sentences and concepts, but to read that out loud or to even read it, it's tough when your sentences are almost a paragraph long. I did try and shorten some of them, but I could definitely do a lot better here. So yeah, that's the novel. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.